Now, an Emeritus Newsbrief, I'm Lynn Huston. Mixed results on Wall Street and more signals for a deepening recession and job losses. First, the Dow finished up today 172.04, the Nasdaq down 11.84. During hearings today at the House Oversight Committee, former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan admitted mistakes were made by him and others, leading up to what he called the financial tsunami.
I think that it's interesting to observe that we find failures of regulation all the time. And one of the reasons is a very significant amount of regulation in the economic area is based on a forecast. To know in advance whether or not particular products will go bad or whether the cycle will turn. If we are right 60% of the time in forecasting, we're doing exceptionally well. That means we are wrong 40% of the time. And when you observe the extent of the broad failure, the difficulty is that nobody can forecast. And if you try to take a look at what the private sector does, it's precisely the same thing that goes on in government. We at the Federal Reserve had a much better record forecasting than the private sector, but we were wrong quite a good deal of the time, and that was reflected in how one views what the appropriate regulatory authorities are, because unless you can anticipate the types of problems that are going to happen, it's very difficult to know what to do. And I think that's the problem that this type of thing confronts, and I don't see any way in which that's going to be fundamentally changed. We can try to do better, but forecasting is it never gets to the point where it's 100% accurate.
The sharpest exchange of the hearing came between SEC Chairman Cox and Congressman Elijah Cummings.
And all I can do is tell you what I see as chairman that we don't have authority to do. We don't have authority to regulate credit default swaps because Congress hasn't given us that authority.
Well, let me ask you about what you could
to do this now.
Mr. Cox, let me ask you about what you could do. Your predecessor, Bill Donaldson, before he left, he set up a task force specifically to look into the problem of financial derivatives, such as credit default swaps. In March 2005, a few months before you became SEC chairman, the Financial Engineering News reported that the SEC had assembled, quote, people from each SEC division, end of quote, corporation finance, enforcement, market regulation, and investment management, to look at issues relating to the derivatives market and the implication of the growth of credit derivatives. What happened to that task force under your leadership?
We have increased the number of people that are focused on risk in the derivatives.
What happened to the task force? Is it still in existence?
The number of people focused on risk, Congressman, are increased under my chairmanship.
Well, let me tell you what your staff says. The ones that come to work every day that we pay. Let me tell you what they said. It said, we have been told by former SEC staff that you failed to support the work of the task force. In fact, you basically defunded the whole office of risk assessment that had been assembled for the task force.
And FDIC Chairwoman Sheila Bair told the Senate Banking Committee today the Treasury Department and the FDIC are formulating a plan to encourage banks to refinance owners who are facing foreclosure.
In sharing ideas with Treasury, we have drawn from the program we're using for modifying loans at IndyMac Federal Bank since we took control of that bank in July. We have introduced a streamlined process to systematically modify troubled home mortgages owned or serviced by IndyMac. As we've done in some past bank failures, we initially suspended most foreclosures in order to evaluate the portfolio and to identify the best ways to maximize the value of the institution. Through this week, IndyMac has mailed more than 15,000 loan modification proposals to borrowers. More than 70% have already responded to the initial mailings in August. More than 3,500 borrowers to date have accepted the offers, and thousands more are being processed. The hope is that our mortgage relief program can be a model and a catalyst to spur loan modifications across the country.
The layoff announcements came from GM and Chrysler. Chrysler says it will end one shift at the Toledo, Ohio Jeep plant. 825 will be on indefinite layoff by the end of the year. And the closing of the Newark, Delaware plant by the end of this year instead of 2009. 1,000 jobs lost there. GM announcing today there will be more white-collar layoffs, no specific number given. The company also says it's ending the 401k payment matches and assistance for tuition and adoption. The latest on issues and public policy, emeritusnews.com. That's an Emeritus News Brief. I'm Lynn Huston.